Hello, everybody. We are now live with Dr. Paul Ben Ishai from Israel. My name is Fabiano from Brazil, from the Slow Phone campaign. We thank you very much, Dr. Paul, to talk with us today. I'm sorry for my English is not so good, but I'm very happy that we can bring to the people in Brazil and other countries that watch us this very important subject.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation. I apologize that my Portuguese is a lot worse than your English. I'm very happy to be speaking to you all today. A little bit about myself. I'm a physicist in radio physics. Basically, I've been working for the last 20 years in the interaction of matter with radio waves, and that includes, of course, us, and that, of course, includes the radio waves that make up cell phones and our communication industry. In the last 3 years, I suppose, I've become quite aware of some of the medical damage or the health issues that seem to arise from the use of cell phones, and what damage they can cause us. And because of that, I have become quite active with the Environmental Health Trust and Dr. Deborah Davis, publishing the real science and trying to warn, if you like, the public or the industry in particular, that there are some health issues to consider and what they should be. So how shall I start? Well, we've all got one of these.
Yes.
And here's a little statistic for you. Yeah, of course. Here's a statistic for you, which is quite interesting. I think I quite like it. I live in a country where there are approximately 9 million people living today, yet there's approximately 10 million cell phones in use. This is a statistic which is repeated quite over. A cell phone is now so totally ubiquitous in the Western world, and actually almost in any world, that it has radically changed the way our societies work. Or I'm pretty sure you can guess that I'm a little bit older than you, Fabian. When I grew up, my mum would say goodbye to me in the morning. She wouldn't see me till the evening, and to be perfectly frank, she didn't really care too much. And she wasn't unusual in that. Nowadays, you would not dream of letting your child outside a door without knowing that he has a cell phone with him or is with someone with a cell phone. Nowadays, we call our children incessantly, and they call us incessantly. Another amazing statistic, we spend on average up to, well, my age, 2 to 4 hours a day on the cell phone without even realizing it. Younger children, that figure can rise up to 7, 8, even 9 hours, even 10 hours a day, once again, without even realizing it. So these have become a basic tool that we cannot now live without. Yet very few of us ask the questions, are they really a healthy tool? Or is just the convenience so much more interesting? If we look at how we're using the phones, well, I have to say it's a bit disappointment. We're not really using them too much for really important stuff. If we're not using them for the work, our personal uses are for sharing photographs, for Facebook, for Twitter, for TikTok, for Snapchat, you name it. And we're flashing reams and reams of quite frankly, useless information around the world. Another amazing statistic for you is that the cell phone industry worldwide now accounts for about $4 trillion of the economy. The cell phone industry, or communication industry, more to be more precise, is consuming about 10% of the Western world's energy output. With the 5G revolution, which is being promised just around the corner, that's set to rise to 20% of the world's energy output. These just give you an idea of just how dramatic has been the intrusion of the cell phone into our life, and how dramatic has been the effect of the cell phone on our lives. Now, we're not going to stop technology, and this is obvious. We want this. That's the other part we also have to admit. We want our cell phones. We want this convenience. We want this information revolution that we've caused. So we have to learn how to live with it. And we also have to learn how to tame it. And that's a point. I'd like, if I may, just to show you something. Could you share the screen a second, please?
Yes. This
This
one?
is yes, that's right. This is a graph from an organization called PowerWatch in the UK. It was presented to me by Alistair Phillips, a very knowledgeable radio engineer about this. And what you're seeing here is a graph which shows our exposure over time. And if you look quite clearly here, the green line is actually the Second World War. Okay, what we see, and the y-axis here is the power densities. It's basically how much energy from the communications from radio waves are we passing through on average. Now, natural background is the green. That means if we went back, say, 100 years or even 120 years, that's a sort of exposure we would have. And that exposure is coming from natural sources, radiation from outside. It's just simply there as the background noise. And it's very, very low. You can see the figures there. It says 10 to the minus 18, 10 to the minus 15. What that means, it is 0.0. Now to count 12 noughts and then put a 1, i.e. it's negligible. You can barely feel it. And then comes the Second World War and a big burst forward in the use of radio waves. And in the 1950s, which is that yellowy mustard color, you see a dramatic increase. In fact, the increase is so large compared to what was that it is quite astounding. And then we go to the 1980s. Now, the 1980s is when the cell phones come on use. So we have in the 1980s here, we have radio flying around. We have TV. TV starts in the 50s. We have the plethora of TV coming out all over the place. But sometime around about here, you can see my little mouse, that would represent the 1990s. And here we start with cell phones. Okay. And then we have 2010s. This is the jump where the internet comes online on the cell phone industry. Basically, it's the beginning of 3rd G and 4th G. And the jump is astounding. We are now up, if I put it in words, compared to the natural background, we are exposed 1 billion times more to radio waves than we were in our great-grandfather's day, if that gives you some idea. Now, I'm pointing out also these lines, this line here. Can you see it? This bottom line?
Yes.
That line is actually the recommended safety level for exposure, as defined by the industry and by the FCC today, 10 watts per square meter. As you can see in the area here, this line here, this is the frequencies of the cell phones. These 3 bumps are the cell phones of today, and I have to say the cell phones of tomorrow, because 5G is also in this area here. We are very, very close to the acceptable limit where we can stay. Now, this has happened in our generations. That means there are children born in 2000 who have now grown up in an environment which electromagnetically could not even be dreamed of by their grandfathers, could not even be dreamed of by their fathers or their mothers. So it's not just that we have changed our social behavior with cell phones, we've actually radically changed the environment in which we live with cell phones. And we're still not quite sure what all this red means in terms of our long-term health. We do know that there are health effects, and we have to think about that. So I'll stop sharing that screen.
And I would like to ask you about these health effects. We have the Bioinitiative report, and we have ICNIRP. I don't know how you call it in English. ICNIRP?
We call them the ICNIRP.
ICNIRP, yeah.
Yes.
The World Health Organization usually follows the ICNIRP standards, right? And talk a little bit about the ICNIRP standards, if you think they are reasonable, or why they were chosen by World Health Organization.
Let's start from the very beginning. Let's start with the end. No, they are not reasonable. They are highly unreasonable, in my opinion. They expose us to way too much. Now let's explain why. The ICNIRP stands for the International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation, protection.
Yes.
ICNIRP. It is a self-appointed body, basically, and it invites its own members onto it, and it is very, very integrated into the industry, the cell phone industry itself. The cell phone industry starts off way back in the 90s, or at least the modern cell phone industry. The first cell phones were actually even in the 80s, with Motorola inventing the whole concept in New York. But way back in 1996, it was realized that you had to have some form of standard about how much radiation a person could be exposed to. And to be honest, way back in 1996, there was a discussion in the Institute of Engineers, the IEEE, and also in the FCC, and also the World Health, about what that should be. The prevalent idea at that time was that the frequencies at which cell phones would work then and now, which is between 800 or 700 megahertz up to now 2 gigahertz in the very, very near future, up to almost 30 gigahertz. The prevalent idea was that the only thing that could possibly cause us would be heating. Because I don't know if you know, but your microwave heats up food by basically energizing it with quite powerful radio waves at 2.7 gigahertz, sorry, which is a frequency which is absorbed, the energy is absorbed by water, and that's then translated into heat. That heats your food. Makes awful cooking, but it heats your food. And we are 70 to 80% water. So the fear was that maybe if the cell phone is transmitting too strongly, then it would heat us, and that could cause us pain. Because if we feel a rise of temperature inside our tissues of more than 0.1 degrees centigrade, we interpret that, we feel it, and that could actually lead to pain. So they made a series of experiments to see just how much energy that would be. And they did it on animals, and they got to the idea that you could absorb up to about 1.6 watts per kilogram of your flesh. The ICNIRP recommendation was actually up to 2, and that's what's used in Europe. Watts per kilogram of your flesh, averaged over a small cube of about 10 grams, and over the time of about 6 minutes. Okay? They said, well, as long as the exposure you have is less than that, then our bodies are fantastic at getting rid of heat, and they are. It won't cause us any particular damage because it's just heat anyway, and we're good at dealing with heat. And you know what? Back in 1996, I would probably have agreed with them. So the cell phone industry went forward, and in 1998, in fact, no, 1997, sorry, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission of the United States, adopted 2 standards for all frequency transmissions up to 3 gig. There's a lot of heavy technical terms here. Please stop me if at any time I get too technical, because I'm a physicist. I like these things, and I forget that other people don't speak my language.
No, but it's okay. I'm understanding.
So they adopted these terms and they put them into regulation. Now, whatever the United States does, the rest of the world does. Within an amazingly short space of time, cell phone industries had conquered the world. I think within 10 years, it was impossible to find a country or a place where you couldn't find a cell phone and a cell phone tower. So the spread of cell phones was amazingly fast. And we moved through different generations. The first cell phones were analog. And in fact, if you had a police scanner, you could scan the radio waves and pick up a cell phone conversation. And as Prince Charles and Lady Parker Camilla Jones discovered, that could be very destructive, because their famous conversation was recorded that way and then published in the paper. It's the conversation where he compares and expresses his love when he shouldn't have expressed his love to her. The second generation of cell phones was the GSM. And this was already a quantum leap, because the transmissions were digital. They were not analog anymore. They involved time pulsing. That means little short spikes of energy, but they kept within the overall recommendations and demands of the FCC. And then we had the third generation, where we got, with the second generation GSM, we got messaging. Third generation, we started to get data. Fourth generation, we got full internet. And as you can see from the graph I showed, the exposure levels just simply rose and rose and rose and rose accordingly as our use rose and rose and rose. Very quickly, there started to be reports coming about that there were adverse effects. People complaining that they got cancers on the side, brain cancers on the side of the head from use of the cell phone. There was also a strong rise in something called electromagnetic hypersensitivity. People complaining of having ill feeling from being in the vicinity of cell phone radiation or wireless radiation. And by the way, that's the other part of the story here. Wireless, which also works at the same frequencies in a very similar manner to cell phones, also conquered the world. So everywhere we now exposed also to wireless networks, which are, at least in terms of signals, look just the same as cell phone signals to me. Although many reports came out, they were roundly ignored by the FCC at the behest of the industry. And if the FCC ignores them, then everyone else ignores them, because the industry is powerful and the industry is making a lot of money. And let's be frank, we, the consumers, want it. So we buy more and more. The point where cell phones, which should be able to last you 4 or 5 years, last you less than a year, because of course we have to buy the newest model. But they ignored these reports of cancers, of sickness, of all sorts of problems coming along. In 2009, there was a review carried out by the FCC of their standards, and they quite simply, at the behest of industry, decided to go ahead with the standards as they are. They didn't change a thing. However, in 2009, the World Health Organization declared cell phone radiation as a possible carcinogen based on epidemiological reports, more and more than which is showing that, yes, there was sickness being caused by cell phones. People were getting cancers, and quite unusual cancers. Another interesting thing began to happen as well. A lot of research started being funded by the industry, and lo and behold, whenever the industry funded the research, the results were almost invariably favorable, whereas independent researchers would would work with other funding and the results would not be. But mainly epidemiological studies were showing that there was an increase, but they were disputed and they were not easy to prove. There's the case of the Million Woman study, for instance, in the United Kingdom, which used NHS records of over 1 million people to see if there were any trends in health. And in particular, they did look at the use of cell phones and was that leading to further cancers. There were many criticisms about how they did their particular research, but one thing they did show, and they did agree on, there had been a 4% rise in acoustic schwannoma, which is a growth in the ear, usually benign, but is actually a form of cancer. And they could attribute that to the use of cell phones. Theirs was not the only one. There were other studies which were actually showing some quite serious brain tumors developing and heart tumors, schwannomas and gliomas. However, the FCC refused to consider anything, and it simply reaffirmed its standards in 2009, and then the rest of the world simply followed suit.
Sorry, let me just ask you something very important.
Sure.
You said before that if it was in 1996, you would agree.
Yeah.
Just explain a little bit this more, because you said in 1996 you would agree with these 6 minutes. Is it right that the standards were based on a 6-minute use?
Yes.
I can believe that.
Oh, even worse. They're also based, now we'll talk about how the actual standards are measured. The standards were based on not just 6 minutes use, but also you having the cell phone at least 1 inch away from your body, and they still are based on that. And by the way, I doubt very much whether you read your user manual for your iPhone. I take it from your silence, you're agreeing you've never read your user manual for your iPhone.
No.
No, I know, nobody ever bothers. But actually inside that user manual is actually written a proviso saying that it complies to the FCC standards of, I think it's what, for this particular iPhone, it's about 1.4 maximum watts per kilogram of your flesh, on condition that you hold the phone 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters from your body.
2.5 centimeters from your body.
Yes. Yes. That's what they demand. So that way it will be safe. However, as you and I both know, most people talk with it against their head. Most people keep it in their pocket. Many women even keep it in their bras. And many people put it in the front pocket, the back pocket. There is now, by the way, a recommendation from the World Health Organization that men who are trying to go to fertility clinics do not keep the cell phone in the front pocket because it is liable to damage fertility. We'll talk about that a little bit later. When finally someone bothered to test, and the Chicago Tribune did this, and also the French Standard Authority, ANFOR, this as well, for 400 different models of cell phones. They did this only, how long ago? This would be 2-3 years ago, when they bothered to test using the same test models as recommended by the FCC, but this time with the cell phone in contact to the body. Every cell phone went beyond the safety standards 4 to 5 times at least.
Wow.
So my first recommendation for people living with cell phones, and that's all of us, keep it off you. Keep it away from you. Okay, if you can. You get in the car, take it out your pocket. You get to an office, take it out, put it on the desk. You have a bag, put it in the bag rather than your pocket. You'll be doing yourself a world of good.
And even in 2009, the FCC didn't change the standards.
They refused flatly. They said there's no proof.
Kept the same standards of 1996, the same time of 6 minutes.
Yes.
That's very strange.
Now, the situation just gets a bit worse because I told you all these reports started to surface. Well, there's now a great body of evidence, and there's at least 2 databases I know of, one maintained by the Oceanographic Group of Australia, and another one maintained actually by an industry database. One has over 4,000 articles, the other has close to 3,000 articles. The great majority show that cell phones do actually cause us health damage in some form. We'll talk about the health damage and why it happens as well. So that's a bit of a scare, isn't it? Now, 2009, the World Health Organization classes cell phone radiation as a class 2B carcinogenic, meaning it is most likely to cause us cancer. They have since reconsidered that, and there are now moves to class it as a full-scale carcinogenic, that it does cause us cancer. Now, as we moved in the history towards the end of the 2010s, 2015, 2014, the communication industry came up with a new idea, the idea of high data rate transmissions to power something called the Internet of Things, a virtual data world whereby every machine in your house will talk to every other machine, the cars will become autonomous and talk to each other, all for our comfort. And all this would go on the backbone of a brand new cellular network. Yeah. a wireless network, and this is basically 5G. This demanded that we move to much higher frequencies, 27 gigahertz. And this is being rolled out now. And immediately, if you like, a technological trade war broke out between the United States and China about who's going to be the first to do this. However, the regulations don't actually cover what you're allowed to do beyond 3 gigahertz. So the FCC had to then decide, okay, the recommendations that we've given from 3 gigahertz up to higher frequencies, 3000 gigahertz, should become not recommendations, but regulations. And of course, those recommendations are exactly the same as the recommendations for the frequencies we use today. They haven't changed and they won't change. However, because public pressure had started to build up that there was health effects, and we will talk about the health effects, it was decided by the FCC to commission a specific study to see if cell phones could cause cancer. Cell phone radiation would cause cancer. So they turned to the FDA, the Federal Drug and Food Administration, who commissioned a particular body inside the United States government, the National Toxicology Program, to do such a study. Now, the job of the National Toxicology Program is to test and measure any substance that could be toxic to the public health. And they do this, and they are well-regarded experts in their fields. They know exactly what they're doing. They based a study on how they designed the study to do this on a study done by another group called the Ramazzini Institute in Italy, which had reported that it had found that cancer could be caused by cell phone radiation. The way they did it, and this study cost close to $30 million, so it's not a cheap study, and took 2 years. They took populations of rats and mice, because it's a well-known fact that whatever causes cancer in rats and mice causes cancer in us. So that's why we use animal models. They took these populations, they isolated them completely from the electromagnetic environment, put them in what's basically called a Faraday cage, which means no signals from outside could come in. One population was allowed to live its life and to breed and to reproduce with no exposure to cell phone radiation or any other radiation at all. The other population, twice a day, was exposed for 10 minutes to cell phone radiation of the type of GSM, that's the second generation, and also to the third generation, LTE. They were exposed for 6 minutes a day. They were exposed at a rate which would put them at the higher end of what the safety levels would be allowed. 2 years the study ran. At the end of 2 years, these populations were culled and they were analyzed. And lo and behold, the population which had been exposed to cell phone radiation was discovered to have some rare forms of cancer at a statistical level, which beyond doubt meant that it was caused by the radiation they had been exposed to. These were gliomas, which are brain cancers, and schwannomas, which are cancers of the heart and the heart muscle. They were quite specific. The males seemed to have more than the females. They also studied how the children, the babies, had also developed. There was also damage there. They did see actual damage in the DNAs as well.
This is the Ramazzini study?
This is from the NTP study, which actually confirmed the Ramazzini study. The NTP released these results, and they're publicly available. You can go to the internet and see them yourselves, in 2018. The FDA and the FCC refused to accept them. They say they must be wrong. So they had them reviewed by 2 panels of experts twice, which is really quite amazing. Both reviews said, no, the experiments have been done perfectly. They've been very thorough, and the analysis is very, very correct. The FDA and the FCC to this day refuse to accept them and say they were flawed. So you have actual proof that cell phone radiation causes cancer. They found rates of cancer up to 6 to 8% in the populations. If it causes cancer in them, it causes cancer in us. Now, epidemiological studies. Yeah.
In the study, they use for 2 years the mouse, the rats, the mice, and just 6 minutes a day.
They exposed them for 10 minutes a day.
2 times a day.
Twice a day.
Yeah, and in the beginning you said the average in your age is 2 to 4 hours, and for young people it's 7 to 9 hours.
Yeah, this is true. Now, let's talk a bit about what all this means. First of all, this is proof that it is possible to cause non-thermal effects. This didn't happen because of heating. This happened because there is an actual mechanism by which they can damage us, and I'll talk about what the mechanism is. We have a very good idea of what it is. Number one, so this destroys the safety standard used by the FCC, which, by the way, is the same safety standard used in Brazil, the same safety standard used in Europe, China, although China and Russia actually have higher safety standards, but they routinely ignore them, at least in Russia.
Just a question: the FCC standards and the ICNIRP standards are the same, or a little bit different? Pretty much the same.
Pretty much the same.
Usually the ICNIRP follows the FCC. The FCC rules the world, actually, the standards for the world, basically.
The FCC bases its scientific reason for the standards on the ICNIRP because they are supposed to be a body of experts. But the ICNIRP is basically a tool of industry, of people who are working both in industry and in the ICNIRP. So they're really quite tainted. The FCC is controlled entirely by the industry because the head of the FCC is a lobbyist from the industry, and he will go back to being a lobbyist of the industry, as was the previous lobbyist head of the FCC. In fact, it is not a regulatory body at all. It is basically a mouthpiece for the industry. So it really is a case of the cats guarding the cream. And they were shocked that actually this study by the NTP had proven conclusively that there was a non-thermal biological effect, and that effect is cancer, and it's about 6% they found in these animals. We will talk a little bit later about how it does that, but it does that. Then they've refused to accept it. Now, they have recently, very recently, in fact, issued what they call a proposed notice of rulemaking, by which they've informed that the current standards used for the cell phones of today will be applicable for the 5G networks as well in the higher frequencies too. And there will be no change, because as far as they see, there's no reason to change. Why is there no reason to change? Because there's trillions and trillions of dollars involved here. It's scary just how much money is involved. And there is a trade war and a technological war going on now between the United States and China about who's going to control 5G networks, who's going to supply the hardware for them, because there's just so much money involved.
You said before it's a $4 trillion industry.
Yeah, $4 trillion industry. Yeah,
trillion.
$4 trillion industry.
Oh, and
it's energy.
Every year or in total?
Every year.
4 trillion every year moves.
Every year.
So yeah, the networks, the hardware, the networks, the signal, everything is involved on cell phone industry.
Everything is involved. Whether it be from the cell phone in your hand to the base station to the backbone,
the apps
that will then take everything.
Yes.
Other damage that we've noticed the World Health Organization has reported this quite happily, well, not quite happily, but quite recently. Our fertility has dropped by 50% over the last 20 years. We know that in vitro, if you expose human spermatozoa to cell phone radiation in the form of cell phone radiation, how it's done, it's not just frequency, we'll talk about that afterwards, their vitality drops by 50%. They simply don't move. And if they don't move, they cannot fertilize. And if they can't fertilize, well, our fertility drops. Now, the same famous saying goes that correlation is not causation. So I can't say that because of what I see in the laboratory, our fertility as human beings have dropped by 50% in the Western world. But it does make you rather think. Now, in many places around the world, as I said, men and young men specifically are now advised not to carry cell phones in their pockets, in the front pockets especially. So that should, I think, worry some people.
50% in the last 20 years.
Yes.
So usually is measured by the number of spermatozoids.
Well, how they measure the fertility, if it's in terms of the family sizes. I mean, there are factors, plenty of other factors going on. But it's not just in terms of, family size. They're also looking at the rise in requests for fertility clinics. It is linked to the fact that we're having children later and later. This is also true. But when you take all these factors into consideration, the fact that we're starting families later, that the families are usually smaller because there's an economic cost in having a family, etc., etc. Still, when you've taken all that stuff into consideration, the fertility has still gone down 50%. Now, it can be for many other factors, our diet, the polluted environments that we live in could also be this too. And it could also be the cell phone radiation, specifically when we can see in vitro that we can affect the vitality of spermatozoa quite easily by irradiating them with not very strong signals.
Just a question. The NTP is a department of the FCC, right?
No, the NTP, the National Toxicology Program, is a department of the National Institute of Health, which is the government body in the United States charged with the public health. So their specific job is to investigate any substance that could be toxic to the public health, be it chemicals, be it particular foodstuffs, whatever. They will investigate to see exactly what that toxicity is, how poisonous it can be. So they are independent of the FCC. And they are very august and very well-regarded research institution.
And they are not so related with the industry as the FCC and the UNIRP. They're more scientific.
They are not related at all to the industry.
Okay. And they confirmed the same conclusions of Ramazzini study? Yes,
they did. They went further, in fact. They not just confirmed, they went further than the Ramazzini Institute.
Okay.
So, now,
I think it's very similar to other substances in the past, let's say tobacco and cigarettes. And we usually, when discuss this subject, we compare with cigarettes and tobacco. And I don't know really the details of the story of tobacco industry and cigarettes, but I'm sure there's a lot of similar.
There are some really very scary similarities between the two, in terms of the lobbying done by the industry to protect themselves, in terms of the denial of the science, and often the if you like, obfuscation of science. They try to disguise it, they try to hide it, they try to make science that will come more in their favor, just as the tobacco industry did. And in fact, if you go to the Edmund Safra Institute of Ethics in Harvard University, there is an extremely interesting book which describes the FCC as a captured industry, a captured agency, because it has ceased being a proper regulator, and it in fact serves the industry needs. And why? In a very similar way to the tobacco industry, the fact that the lobbyists become the heads of the regulatory body itself, and vice versa. So yes, unfortunately, this is something that every industrial revolution that we've had in human society has led to some very detrimental effects on our health. You can see pollution in the industrial revolution and whatever, which has only been cleaned up much, much, much later. However, we don't have to keep repeating the mistakes of the past. And if we do take an analogy with the tobacco industry did its best to hide the science for 50 years, even though they knew that tobacco and nicotine were highly addictive and highly damaging to us. Yet they did their best to hide it. And only really, what was in the last 10 years, that they've been called to order on that, and they've had to pay massive, massive payments. Another interesting thing about the cell phone industry, by the way, is the fact that they can no longer get third-party insurance against class action suits. The insurance industry will not insure the cell phone because they believe that very soon, not too far down the line, there will be class action suits against the cell phone industry, which will cost millions of dollars. So they can't get insurance anymore.
Yeah, I heard that you very interesting fact. You said just for 50 years, the industry of tobacco tried to hide the scientific facts, but they could not go on with that, because it's interesting to study what happened after 50 years trying to hide the information, what happened in society, because today I think everybody agree that it's not good for health.
Yeah,
but how was it 50 years later? Before,
if you look at what happens, I mean, I remember when I growing up, smoking was an accepted part of culture. That you would find smoking in offices, you would find smoking in bars, in restaurants. It was normal, and you were considered to be strange if you didn't smoke, and you were considered to be rude if you asked someone to stop smoking in your presence. Nowadays, if we look what we have, in many places you cannot smoke outdoors, you can't smoke inside restaurants, you can't smoke in bars. Ireland's an extremely good example of that, for instance. Even the UK is a very good example of that. Nowadays, if maybe 40 to 50% of the adult population 40 years ago smoked, today it's only about 20% smoke. Sorry, my cat wants to join me. It's only about 20%, and in the Western world, probably dropping. It's on the rise in other parts of the world. So yeah, and there are strong laws in place to limit the actual effects of passive smoking and of smoking on our health. It's not that we have outlawed or denied the right to smoke, but as a society, we've accepted that there is damage, and we've done our best to mitigate that damage. And even with that, I mean, there are estimations that smoking is killing thousands and thousands of people. The same thing has not happened with cell phones yet, but it probably will. And also at the same ginormous cost in terms of our public health, and also in terms of the cost to the cell phone industry itself. The payments by companies like Philip Morris were astounding that they had to make. And I imagine something similar will happen eventually to the cell phone industry too.
Yeah, that's the point. I believe in that. I believe the payments that you have to pay. I don't know. I don't have knowledge about around the world if there's some country that already people are asking injustice about payments. But I think this will change a lot when the payments start to happen. In a couple of years, I believe it will start to happen because there's a lot of body of scientific proof. So
this is beginning.
Just a matter of time to happen. The payments will be bigger and bigger.
This is actually beginning already. In Italy, there's already one court case which has been won by a plaintiff who claimed that he had brain tumors because of cell phones, the use of cell phones, and he has won his case. There are numerous prosecutions and court cases against the cell phone industry, kept very quiet, of course, but they are out there and they're only going to grow. It's against the way that the cell phone industry has railroaded its way over many places. For instance, in the United States, the cell phone industry has the ability to place an antenna wherever it cares to, and the local authority actually cannot object. And this was rammed through the Senate with massive payments, of course, to particular senators involved by the cell phone industry, all in the name of technological progress, all in the name of conquering the 5G network for the future. So yeah, there are lots of court cases now happening in the States. There's even one in New Hampshire, very current at the moment, against the FCC for the regulation or its lack of regulation, and actually for the ability of the cell phone industry to do basically whatever it wants in the United States.
These prosecutions usually are against the industry of the hardware of the cell phone or the network, or you said this one in New Hampshire is against the FCC? But depends of the case.
Well, it depends on many things. I mean, there are not many against actual health aspects yet. As I said, in Italy there are, and there's a few others starting in Europe now as well. In the States, it's more against the ability of the cell phone industry to place antennas willy-nilly wherever it wants with almost no regard to the local population. But I imagine you're also going to see proper court cases against them in terms of health aspects as well. It's starting.
Yeah. I think this is the way. This is the way because you talk the same language of the economic, not just scientific proofs, and you have more articles and more reports.
Yeah.
But when it starts to, in the wallet, in the money, starts to make some difference,
This is unfortunately very true. I think it's probably a good idea to speak about how is it actually hurting us. If you'd like, let me start another particular. Hold on. I've got you back. I'm going to drag you across if I can. Okay, for some reason, when I'm showing this, I can't actually show what I want. But maybe if I stop that slideshow. Am I able to share?
Yeah.
Here's the share screen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share the screen. Okay, I'm going to actually share the screen with you on it. So you should probably see yourself, and I'm going to start a presentation here. Can you see this presentation? Safe for generations to come?
Can I put it?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Yeah, there we go.
This actually is like a sort of 5G primer, and I'm not going to give all the slides here, but I want to show some of them. This first slide here is actually an article written in the Microwave magazine of the IEEE, which is the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. And it is in defense of the coming 5G, and as you can see from the title, safe for generations to come. Okay, and it gives some nice little facts, which I think are quite nice. For instance, it shows you just what those safety standards are, and I'd like you to pay attention to here. This is called power density. This is the amount of energy flowing through any square meter which you would be exposed to. And as you can see, the IRCNIP value is 10 watts per square meter, which is pretty high. Mm-hmm. FCC is exactly the same. Look at China. China is 1/100th of that.
0.1.
So is Russia. Although, believe me, the Russians do not keep to that at all. Switzerland and Italy also 1/100th of what's accepted. Other places in Europe actually follow the same as IRCNIP. And this typical value that what you're actually experiencing from base stations, which is quite true, but is actually too high. So
0.01.
That's
minimal exposure from cellular base station.
Yeah, exactly. So that's from the cell phone towers, the antennas around you. Now, this is if you are at a distance. Now, cell phone towers can transmit anything from 100 meters away up to even up to 7 kilometers away, depending on what the output power is. And the output powers can go from as low as 20 watts, even up to as high as 120, 130 watts. They can be very powerful. And you are recommended to be at least 100 meters away from the large cell phone towers you see on these large masts, which are pumping out quite high values. But if you are far away, on the average, you'll be exposed to 0.01 watt per square meter. The bioinitiative, as you've probably seen, is much requires it to be much less than that, by almost a millionfold. Okay.
So China, Russia, Switzerland, and Italy, they have very more restricted standards than the FCC and the IRCNIP.
Yes, they do. But trust me, Russia doesn't really keep to them.
Okay.
If you go to Russia, you'll find far higher standards. But this is what you should be getting from the base station, these values over here.
Okay. And the cell phones still work in these countries?
Oh, of course.
People use cell phones. Maybe the power intensity is not so high, but
Well, here comes the point. Here comes the point, you see. This is from the cell phone base station. Now, the lower the signal from the base station, the harder your cell phone will work. And your cell phone working about 1 or 2 watts is the upper power they have. So if you're far from a base station, receiving a very weak signal, and a cell phone can detect a signal down to 0.000001 watt per square meter. They are very sensitive, but they will work much higher, much harder, and that's right next to you. So 80% of your exposure is really from your cell phone and not from the cell phone tower.
8% of your exposure?
80
is not from the station.
It's not. It's from your own cell phone, which is with you.
Okay. So the less is the emission of the tower, the more strong your device has to work. Yeah.
Which conversely argues that we should have lots more antennas all over the place so that our cell phones will work less, because that's where the main exposure is from. Well, this is actually, at least technologically, true. However, if you don't have a cell phone, like your small baby or small child, you're exposed to far more radiation, and we'll talk about why that is negative in a minute. Okay. So those are the standards. Okay, they're what we've been talking about the whole time. And these same standards, which you see on the screen now, lots of numbers, not very interesting, lots of numbers, but here you see the recommendation: 1.6 watt per kilogram, 1 gram of tissue in the head, or 4 watts per kilogram over 10 grams in the limbs. Yeah, but that's actually over 6 minutes. Now, in terms of star ratings, the FCC is actually stricter than the ICNIP. And I'd like you to look at this one. This is basically how they see power density being allowed. These numbers are people who actually work in the industry and have to work on antennas. This is for people working on antennas. This is what it looks like. And we're basically over here. If we go with 5G will take us to the very limit, as you can see, regardless of what they say. This is how SAR ratings are supposed to work. It's actually taken from the mobile manufacturers forum, so they can boast about how good they are. The trouble is that this is not actually a safe exposure down here. This is what we're beginning to realize when we look at the adverse health effects. All of this assumes that the only health effect is heating. And this is the mistake, because it is not heating. So I will skip this. This is a rather technical slide for people like me who look at how we interact with radiation, and I will just jump forward. A few of the publications: mobile phone use and risk of tumors meta-analysis. Conclusion: current study found there's possible evidence linking mobile phones to increased risk of tumors. Meta-analysis means they looked at many studies and tried to analyze what they saw. That's from 2009. 2009, I remind you, the World Health Organization classified cell phone radiation as a possible carcinogenic. This is some of the reports that they found and why. 2017, mobile phone use and the risk of brain tumors, systematic review of association studies between source funding. This is a very interesting study. I rather like it because this study found that there is a definite risk of brain tumors for long-term users, more than 10 years. And I have to tell you, everyone nowadays is a long-term user. They also showed quite nicely that the source of funding had a strong impact on how the research would be done and actually be published. Another one, long-term exposures of 835 megahertz REF. That's basically GSM phones. Induces hyperactivity, autophagy, demyelination in the cortical neurons of mice. It can do damage to mice, so it sort of suggests that maybe there's something it can do to us. And more studies, and the studies go on and on and on. Actually, it becomes quite depressing. You can see human disease resulting from environmental health. 2013, microwave radiation, electromagnetic fields produce widespread neuropsychiatric effects, including depression, clinical neuroanatomy, acute effects of radio effects. It just simply goes on. I can just put them out.
And how they say there's no scientific proof?
because they say that these are speculative and there's no scientific proof because they do not believe. Basically, it's a belief. I think that's the best way to put it. It is a belief that there is no damage to us. And the last thing I'd like is, well, what is the mechanism? Why can it damage us? And this is the lead, I think, in the mechanisms that we think it could be done. And it does something to do with what's called a voltage-gated calcium channel. Now, this rather nice-looking picture, which is quite technical, focus, if you like, on the membrane of a cell, a human cell. And the human cell, you know, if we describe it, it is actually a sac floating in a liquid environment, and inside that sac is a liquid environment, which contains a whole bunch of machinery, proteins, DNA, which have a task to do. Now, the way they'll do that task and how well they'll perform that task depends very much on the environment inside the cell, and in particular on the balance of ions like calcium, like sodium, and oxygen that are inside the cell. Not quite oxygen, but what's called reactive oxygen species, radicals, free radicals, you may have heard of them. Now, we, in the natural course of our life, inside the cells, the bioactivity that they have produces free radicals. It's quite natural and quite normal. And our body knows how to deal with them. It deals with them by opening up the membrane and allowing ions to come inside and to go out to simply regulate the amount of free radicals inside cells themselves. Now, these particular bunch of proteins that do this are called voltage-gated calcium channels. And this is an illustration of them, what they would look like. Now, the way they work is that if on the inside there is an imbalance of ions compared to the outside, that looks to this protein almost like an electric field. And it reacts to that, opens, if you like, and allows ions to slip inside or to slip outside to balance up. Okay, so why should we care? Well, the point is that the time scales for this to work are about 50 milliseconds. And that just happens to be the sort of time scales which GSM phones are working. Now, what you're looking down here is a time graph of the transmission from a phone. All these little spikes are basically the electromagnetic field coming on and turning off, coming on and turning off. Pulses, basically. And those pulses are basically electric fields. And what we feel is happening with us is that long-term pulses to which we are exposed damage the internal balance of our cells. They simply interfere with this mechanism. And that leads to an abundance of reactive oxygen species inside, basically free radicals, oxygen ions themselves, which they can cause what's called oxidative stress. They can cause damage. They can lead to ill health, and eventually they can even lead to cancer. Now, this is not something that happens immediately. I'll simply stop sharing at the moment. Okay. This is not something that's happening like immediately all the time. You turn on and immediately you're going to feel ill. This is a cumulative effect. Years of exposure building up inside us. The fact is, for most of us, it's not going to be a problem. We're going to go on with our lives and not feel any problems from that. But for a certain percentage of the population, it is going to be a problem. And it could be simply a suppressed immune system. It could be almost an allergic reaction, people who suffer from electromagnetic hypersensitivity. It's a growing portion of our populations now. And it could, in the extreme, be cancer. And here's the point. Because this is a cumulative, slow effect, exposure over years and years and years, you saw the article talking about more than 10 years, we don't feel it directly. Mm-hmm. So we're not aware that there's damage involved. It is actually on the public health that there's damage. And the public health is always the most difficult thing of all, because it's not the individual. We personally don't feel it. But I'll give you an example. The feeling is now that gliomas, which affect about 3% of the population, may be increased because of cell phone radiation by up to about 4.5%. Okay, so if I tell you that your cell phone is 96% safe, maybe there's a 4% chance you can get something bad, would that stop you using a cell phone? No, of course not. After all, it's more dangerous to cross the road. But if I tell you, look out your window and you see 100 people, 4 of them are going to die because of the cell phone. That's something else.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the point. It's a public health issue.
Yes.
Now, Now the question is, and of course, I'll actually just go one stage further, and no, I'll leave that. I won't talk about that. The question is there a safe level? What can we actually do?
Yes.
Well, first of all, there was a lovely study very recently in India where they looked at these reactive oxygen species, which you can find in the blood of people. There's plenty of tests to show if you have elevated levels of stress because of free radicals in the blood itself, because of the reaction. They looked at people who were living close to cell phone towers, within 80 meters, against other populations who were living far from cell phone towers, more than 300 meters away. They measured the exposure levels of these people as well, and the people living at more than 300 meters away were down to levels of less than 0.00005 watts per square meter. And they took almost every possible factor into consideration. Did the people smoke? Did they use cell phones? Did they have wireless in the house? Did they have a microwave in their house? How healthy they were, their age groups, men, women. They really did an extremely good epidemiological study here. They found that for the people living close by, yes, there was elevated levels of oxidative stress in their body, which they could associate with the fact that they were living close to a cell phone tower. Now, they're living there all their lives, yeah? People far away at the very low levels, they showed no particularly great signs of oxidative stress at all in their blood. So there could well be a safe level. And if the industry was working to that safe level, then maybe our cell phones would be safer for us. Now, the real battle from the science point of view is to force the industry to accept that there's a problem and to work at a safe level and to make the industry work at a safe level. And it's not happening at the moment. The average levels, as you saw in that article, were 0.01 watt per square meter, and they're pretty accurate. Those are more or less the average levels, and we expect actually to increase by about 30% with the onset of 5G. That brings us back to the cell phone itself. What are the recommendations I can give to people using cell phones today, like me, like you? First of all, use wires. Don't use Bluetooth. Bluetooth is actually a transmitter, and people who put a headphone on with Bluetooth, I mean,
terrible.
I'm sorry, you're dumb. That's not the way you can put it. Just sticking the antenna in your ear. Keep the cell phone away from you. If you can use the speaker, use the speaker. Much better than using the in contact. If you can text. The youth of today have got that right. It's actually more healthy for us to text than it is to speak. If you're going to speak, use a speaker. If you can put it in a bag, keep it in a bag. Keep it off your body. If you have to have it in your body, keep it there as little as possible. If you get into an office, take it out of your pocket, put it on the desk. If you sit down, take it out, put it on the desk. You get in the car, take it out, put it by the side. Keep it away from you as much as you possibly can.
Yeah.
You want to watch YouTube? Use the computer. Okay.
Oh, we have a question here
Sure.
for Army Hunter. If I don't want radiation Wi-Fi from my neighbor inside my home, I don't have legal instruments to prohibit it or prosecute him, correct?
Absolutely correct. I think it's the same in Brazil as it is all around the world. No, you can't prosecute him. There's no way you can do this. If you want to be sure, then there are products you can buy which give you what's called an electromagnetic shield against wherever he has placed his Wi-Fi. But if his Wi-Fi is not breaking the actual regulations of how much it's allowed to transmit, not much you can do.
Yeah. And today we have a lot of Wi-Fi connections. If you live in a building and you have many different floors, and you see how many connections of Wi-Fi routers on the whole night long on. That's what we say, people. Why you leave your Wi-Fi router the whole night on? Why you do that?
Because we're lazy. Because we don't think to turn it off, like we turn off the lights in the house. Wi-Fi is another big issue, because Wi-Fi is actually a problem, because a Wi-Fi router works the same way as a cell phone. It transmits in more or less the same frequencies. It transmits in more or less the same ways. So it's also sending out this pulsed energy, pulse signals, which are what seem to be doing us the damage more than anything. And it can work up to 2 watts sometimes. Actually, it's not quite. It's supposed to work up to 1 watt if it's FCC standard, and up to 0.1 watt if it's European standard. But they're everywhere. And of course, people complain they don't have decent coverage. So what do? They install another one, a booster. Okay, so it's everywhere, and you can't get it. And it's actually more exposure, far higher exposure, often than the cell phone. So they are a problem, and it's actually a completely open thing. You can't do very little about it. Now, the good news is it doesn't go very far. The bad news is you're going to find very soon in Brazil, like we have in Israel and other places, that municipalities will start to install LED lighting, LEDs, light emitting diodes, because they're cheap and because they save a lot of electricity, and this is absolutely true, and for that they're fantastic. But often they will be centrally controlled by having a Wi-Fi router stuck on the top of them to connect them all up, so that from a central place they can be turned on, turned off. Which means that if you wanted to escape Wi-Fi by walking in your street or in your local park, you won't. It'll be there too.
I think this whole subject is not that we are against internet or against technology or against communication, but why we have to commit to damage our health to have internet or to access communication. Why we need to destroy our health? We are so creative as human beings. We are so capable to create more creative ways of connecting. I'm sure this is not the only way to use the internet. The subject is not that we are against internet or against communication, but why we need to have gliomas and brain tumor and all these free radicals issues just to access internet or faster and faster internet. I'm sure there's another way.
There are many illogicities involved in the story of our love with communications and cell phones. The whole concept of the Internet of Things, for instance, is a big question. Let's put it this way. The idea of the Internet of Things, you've probably heard of it, the IoT, is that everything will be connected to everything else. And already you have air conditioning in your back, behind you there. So nowadays, if you buy new air conditioning, you probably don't know, but it comes with a Wi-Fi router inside. Well, a Wi-Fi connection. Why? So you can link it to your Wi-Fi network. And once it's linked to your Wi-Fi network, then with your cell phone, you can turn it on, turn it off, even if you're not at home. Now, you may ask, wow, great, fantastic. Or you may ask, why would I need such a thing? What's the problem with me getting home and pressing a button? Or using the remote, which is usually working on infrared? Well, no good reason, but it will sell. And to justify it, they're telling you that in the very near future, you will live in a house where the fridge will communicate automatically via your Wi-Fi with the shop to give the inventory of what's inside and order for you your basics, foodstuffs, without you having to bother. You'll get in your car, and your car will test sensors in your clothing to see how comfortable you are and adjust its own internal air conditioning so that you'll be comfortable. We'll drive home automatically. completely safely while you read the book or whatever you want to do. And on the way, we'll inform your house to get ready. So the lights will turn on at the right moment for you to come in. The air conditioning will be such that it will be perfect. And the cooker, the oven will be working because it's been told to work. In short, a world where machines will talk to machines to serve us. Now, that may be a utopia, or it may be a ridiculous pipe dream. Or you may ask yourself, why the hell do we need it?
Yeah.
However, here's the silly thing. Currently, your house and all the machines in it are already wired. They are wired via the electricity network inside your house. Every machine is connected to a cable. Not only that, every machine in your house is connected to 3 cables. One which is live, one which is neutral, and one which is a ground cable, which does nothing except discharge the current if you are silly enough to tamper with it and electrocute yourself. There are companies which will sell you a nice device which will turn that third wire into an internet cable and allow you to link via your electricity network 2 rooms. You could say, why couldn't you just link every machine the same way? Why would you need Wi-Fi if you already have a network in your house? Obviously. The reason is very simple why you would need a Wi-Fi. It sells things. No other reason.
Yeah, and also because not so much people are speaking about what we are speaking now.
No.
That's why for 50 years, the industry of tobacco kept selling and selling. And I'm sure, like you said, it's very common to people who smoke, and it's very strange if you don't smoke.
Yeah.
So for 50 years, they kept hiding the information, the scientific proof about the reality of tobacco. And I believe the same of these electromagnetic fields, how they affect the health. They are surfing in this wave of not so much people talking about, and a lot of people hypnotized, like very, my God, 5G and my Netflix and very fast communication, very fast web connections. And not so much people are talking about this. So
no,
what do you
we are being sold a dream.
Yes. Can you tell us about some country or some city or some region in the world that you see that it's more advanced in this knowledge? I've heard something about Salzburg in Austria or some other places there we can have some hope about it.
Yeah, there is a groundswell on a number of facts, on a number of levels. The cell phone industry is doing its best to push out the 5G as fast as possible. It wants to sell us this dream, and it wants to make a million of us by forcing us to buy machines, etc., etc. So we'll use it, and we will, because we want this communications. However, there are now quite a few countries which are stating that it's not going to happen until proper health effects are assessed. So, for instance, the rollout of 5G in Switzerland was stopped in its tracks by the government, while the government's demanded that there be a health study made. Brussels. Town of Brussels, the same thing. Once again, the rollout was stopped while health checks were demanded that they be made. There is now a movement inside the European Parliament asking some very pointed questions about what are the health implications of 5G on the cell phone networks, and asking, okay, what the science is showing there's a problem here. What's actually going on? Estonia stopped 5G being rolled out in its country because they claim, I agree with them, that there are health effects which are not being considered here in what's going on, and there are other countries which are going to go the same way. Even France is now asking some very pointed questions about the cell phone industry. To the point now, there is something called the Phone Alert, another organization in France, which pointed out and helped the French government through its standard authority, ANFOR, to realize that most of the cell phones being sold were actually going beyond the existing safety levels, so why should they be sold? They've even taken cell phones off the network. They've had them taken out. The one country where nothing is happening is the States, because here the FCC is forcing everything through it as much as it possibly can for it. The only thing that matters to it is that the industry be allowed to thrive and to dominate the world market, if you like. But there are now quite a few legal issues against them and legal cases against them. And if you go to the Environmental Health Trust website, you'll see there a very impressive list of legal actions against the FCC going on in the United States at the moment. Quite a few townships in California have stated categorically, though, they will not allow FCC or they will not allow the 5G to be rolled out there until there are some health checks made on it. And some of them have even been sued by the industry because the law allows.
These townships in California, they are able to own their own territory, or they need to accept?
Well, according to the law, no. The law in the States allows the cell phone industries, if there's any impediment to the communication industry, to actually sue. It's actually illegal for many municipalities to say, no, I don't want this in my neighborhood. But even with that, there are challenges to those rulings happening in the States now. New Hampshire, I mentioned, there's a big challenge happening there. So if you go to the Environmental Health Trust, you will see there a very nice list of action suits against the FCC, and also a nice list of world actions happening around the world at the moment against the cell phone industry, against the unbridled rollout of 5G without proper health considerations happening.
Yes.
So it's starting. Now, on the technological level, there are actual technological solutions to most of this. The Chinese recently showed a nice network based on what's called a femtocell concept and a smart cell concept, whereby outside, instead of having large cell phone towers pumping out cell phone radiation, they would have smaller femtocells, which would be much, much lower, working at wattages only, which would also turn themselves off and turn themselves on as a person would walk along. And in fact, I have a friend who suffers from electromagnetic hypersensitivity who told me that it was one of the first times in his life he could actually walk anywhere without feeling sick because of Wi-Fi.
What's the name of this technology again?
Using femtocells. Femtocell is a femtocell. It's a very small access point, which works at very low outputs, about a watt and less. And the idea is that you would have many of them, and they can be controlled and turned off when not in use and when not needed in use. And the nice thing is it reduces the overall ambient radiation that you're affected by. However, you won't find them in the States.
And these femtocells, can you use to different frequencies? Yeah, but I mean, within the frequency boundaries that are dictated by 4G, 3G, or by the 5G. And your friend, that's EHS, electro hypersensibility, he felt very good in these places?
Yeah, he felt one of the few places in the world he could actually walk outside without feeling sick in a city environment.
And this city he went is in China?
I think it was in Shanghai.
In Shanghai. You know why moved this Shanghai city to use this femtocells technology? What moved them? What caused this change? It was a mobilization of the people.
Well, in China there's no such thing as a mobilization of people of the people. The government decides, and that's what will be, and everyone obeys. And it was, I think, mainly a government exercise. Now, is it widespread in China? No. If you look, they are very proud of having the first 5G network in around Beijing actually functioning. It is a quite horrible thing with antennas all over the place, which makes it very uncomfortable. And the reason they're doing this is because they want to dominate the technological backbone of 5G. And at the moment, Huawei is probably the leader in 5G technology, the backbone. And they already have pre-orders, of billions of dollars to supply equipment. So it was probably an experiment. If it's going to be an experiment which continues, that I doubt. Because as I say, the Chinese would like very much to dominate the technological backbone for 5G.
Maybe this experiment with the femtocells in Shanghai is more as a maybe a economical motivations than health motivations.
Quite
maybe,
likely.
Yeah, but
Quite
interesting that there is some decrease of the health effects. That's very interesting. That's a hope.
Well, I mean, there is the point about cell phones is that we're not going to stop the cell phone revolution because we want it. I mean, we all have cell phones, we all use them.
Yes.
And it is a question of, okay, managing a risk, which is not happening at the moment because, of course, nobody wants to admit there's a risk. But when you start talking in the terminology of, okay, let's manage the risk, well, the first thing is you ask yourself, okay, how can we lower the exposure levels so they come to a level where they are actually, at least biologically, not so active? And how can we work within those levels on a technological side that phones will still work? It's all possible. It's just expensive.
Yes. We did an interview with a very good mathematician that he was studying models for these very little antennas there's inside here. And he was studying a different model that is very low SAR. That's how you call SAR?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very...
Right.
Yeah, it's a very different kind of antenna, but increases a lot of the cost of the cell phone. But he was studying these very good antennas, but I think Motorola has one patent, one of the patents, and the department have another one. But of course, not so much people are asking that. It's like a filter for the cigarette or something that in an analogy of the cigarette.
Unfortunately, the technology behind cell phones is very complicated, and so we cannot expect that the person that's treated is going to demand. They're not even going to be aware that you could be using a much safer design of antenna, which would reduce the SAR greatly. That's just not going to happen. It is actually the job of government, considering what the risk could be, accepting, okay, science says there's a risk, let's accept there's a risk. And it should be government which then insists that the industry does work according to these levels. Because, you take 10 engineers, stick them in a closed room, say they've got to work according to this low level, they'll come up with a solution.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Paul. I think I learned a lot in this conversation. I'm very interested in these phantom cells. I don't know if I spelled correct, but I will search about it. And of course, we have some advices, like you said, to keep away the cell phone from your body, if you can turn off your router at night, you can turn off and be more in the countryside, in the nature, a little bit away from urban, if it's possible, to stay some time. And those are very good advice. And of course, to get informed and take care of the babies and the pregnant woman, they need to be very more alert. And I don't know if you know something about these fabrics with silver fiber.
Mm-hmm.
I heard something that in Israel they're very good fabrics with silver, and actually they seem to work. But
I mean, there are a number of materials you can use for what's called electromagnetic shielding. And they also come in fabric form. They can be good. They can cut out an awful lot, and they can shield you from a fair amount.
Yes.
You can buy them on the internet, by the way. Quite reputable places do sell them now. But there are stuff like that you can use if you need it. Once again, I say most of us are never going to need to worry about this, because most of us are going to deal with the exposures and what it does to us. and it's not really going to affect us. It'd be enough if we just simply make sure we keep things away from us. But for those people who do develop EHS, who do begin to feel ill, yeah, these are the solutions that exist. Special fabrics that can reduce the effects on you, they can block the signal. Special paints that you can use inside your house, maybe to shield one wall. It's an industry inside itself.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I'm also very interesting about when the cell phone started. You said something about Motorola invented the concept in New York. Maybe in another conversation we can talk about this. How all this thing started. It's a very new industry. Let's say have less than 40 years.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting how the thing started. And today is a $4 trillion industry, $4 trillion industry.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we could bring a lot of very nice information. Thank you very much, Paul.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.